Chapter 5. A short while later, Roo made his way out of the ladies' quarter with 16 copper coins and a silver sealed in his backpack. The strange gold coin weighed heavy in the pouch around his neck. He had carried coin on behalf of his customers before, and as always, had the brief thought of keeping it for himself. Roo knew this was a short-term plan. His messenger run continued because some of the people in Yor had come to trust him, and to break that trust would soon see his work dry up. Tok had always told him that as a Udai, one mistake was all it took. Still, the gold coin would easily feed him for a year. He was keen to get back up to the rooftops. He ducked into a narrow alleyway. The fog grew thick here. There was a figure huddled against the wall, one of the many beggars that lived on the street. Roo moved quickly past. "Spare a coin, Chris Runner?" a voice wheezed. The boy paused in mid-stride and glanced at the figure. It was a bent old man covered in a ragged blanket. A large white Kriska sat on his shoulder, its red eyes fixed on Roo. Roo sighed. It was considered bad luck to not show charity in front of a Kriska. The Kris King saw everything after all. Many beggars tried to keep Kriska for this very reason, though they made for reluctant pets. Roo fished out a copper and tossed it to the old man. "May the Kris King slumber," said Roo, clumsily making the customary blessing. "He stirs, lad," rasped the old beggar. "But you are watched over. Keep walking the straight." "Thank you." The old beggar stroked his Kriska. "And Fat White here tells me it is time for you to run." Roo frowned and then glanced up at the open mouth of the alleyway. His heart sank as he saw shadowy figures move in through the fog. A girl's voice carried, calm and cultured. "Well, well, Roo. Looks like you are trying to cross our square without paying the toll." Roo recognized the voice and knew what it meant. Smoothly he lunged further down the alleyway, breaking into a sprint. "Get him," said the voice, and a chorus of shouts joined her. Roo didn't slow for the corner as it turned into a broken brick wall. Instead he ran up the wall, his left foot hitting a sill of boarded-up window, his right foot finding the edge of a stone pillar, his left foot finding another ledge as his hands pulled him up to sit on a wall 2 stories high. He looked down at the gaping, soot-smeared faces. "Morning, Vince," said Roo, pleased his voice sounded steady. "I'll avoid the toll road today, I think." He thumbed over his shoulder. "Rooftops are free. Chris Law." The girl called Vince stepped forward from a group of 6 large boys. She leaned against a thick wooden cane and walked with a noticeable limp. She was tall, but stood stooped over her walking stick. Vint was a pale son, obvious from her albino skin. Her face was painted in her gang colours, long blue streaks falling like tears from her eyes. Her long flowing mohawk was also dyed blue. She looked at the height he had covered in his climb and gave a grudging nod of respect. "We will see about the Chris Law." She turned to a blond boy beside him. "I told you we should have surrounded him." The blond boy shrugged. Vint looked up. "How much coin did the old man give you, Roo?" Roo's heart sank. They must have been watching him. If they knew he had gold on him, they would chase him all night. They would rob him, and no one would believe Roo didn't keep the coin for himself. 2 coppers, he lied. "And I'll pay a copper toll if you let me be on my way." Vince's eyes narrowed. "Lucas says he saw gold." The blond boy beside her nodded. "Lucas can't even put his pants on the right way," said Roo. "It was definitely gold," mumbled Lucas, and Roo smiled as he saw the boy glance down at his leggings. "No, just copper," said Roo with a shrug. He heard a sound behind him, a foot slipping on mortar, and he turned to see 3 hooded boys climbing onto his roof. Vint had indeed sent others ahead to surround him. Roo pulled his legs up under him and sprang forward, leaping across the alleyway, over the gang below. His hands caught the edge of the wall on the other side and he swiftly pulled himself up as hands reached up for him. He stood and looked at the 3 boys. They hesitated to attempt the same jump. He smiled at their caution. Kriska gathered along the rooftops, chittering in agitation. The gang below pulled their hoods over their heads. It was a bad sign when someone tried to hide their features from the eyes of the Chris King. It meant misdeeds were to follow. The hooded figures disappeared into the fog, looking to find a way up. Vint stood alone, watching Roo, a small smile playing on her face. She absently stroked a gaudy necklace made of painted wood and nails. The girl gave the boy a nod and then turned, limping slowly away. Roo took a quick look at the boys across the alleyway. It was time to go. Roo was small for his age, a wiry, lean alley cat swaddled in patchwork rags. He ran at speed now, trusting in his knowledge of the rooftops. Kriska ran before him, and again he felt the oneness of the pack. There was no hesitation as he leapt dizzying drops and scaled high, sloping walls. He edged across narrow ledges, hugging tight to the great towers. He climbed angled roofs, and then he slid down the other side, crouched low, ready to burst into a sprint again. It seemed the rooftops were suddenly filled with people. Vint's gang were many, and this was their territory. They also knew the rooftops well, and for every menacing boy that fell away behind Roo, another seemed to spring up to his left or right, outstretched hands clutching for him. Roo ducked and weaved, staying just a step ahead of the growing gang. There must be close to 20 of them now, all shouting out where Roo was, giving instructions to head him off. The Kriska in front of him suddenly backtracked, warning Roo just in time as 4 boys appeared out of nowhere. Roo had to retreat, leaping over another boy who was just climbing up a wall. He was being funneled, and he was pretty sure he knew to where. The Kriska spread out as if trying to find their own way out of the trap. Many returned to Roo, giving him warning that Vint's gang were approaching from that direction. Roo found himself following the path of Kriska that continued going forward. Higher he went as homes made way for larger warehouses. The horizon of the ocean lay ahead. Roo was being forced towards the docks, where his maze of rooftops would run out. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the spread out line of Vint's gang. The gaps in it would quickly close if he attempted to turn. Grimly he pressed on, looking for a way to get around his pursuers. As more Kriska returned, he knew his options were running out fast. Suddenly, the slanted rooftops fell away and swaying masts filled the horizon. The smell of fish filled his nose. He had arrived at the docks of yore. He had run out of rooftop. He stood at the edge of a 3-story rise and looked down. The pier was below him, filled with workers unloading a catch from a lean fishing vessel. A large group of Kriska gathered at the edge, chittering angrily. Roo turned. Vint's gang circled behind him. The boys had slowed as they realized their prey was cornered. They were all breathing heavily and did not look happy. Some of them eyed the Kriska warily and pulled their hoods further over their faces. "Give us the gold, Roo. Stop stuffing us around." Roo recognized the voice. It was the blonde boy, Lucas. Roo looked over the edge again. The docks here were narrow, the sea not far away. Boats were loosely lashed to grey-green piles, leaving small gaps that were bridged by thick planks. The sea moved heavily between these gaps, dark and foreboding. Roo sighed and backed up, taking a deep breath. He could not afford to be caught. The gang was almost upon him when he dashed forward. Roo's eyes narrowed, and the edges of his vision blurred red. With his eyes locked onto the small gap between the docks and the boat, Rue leapt. The gang of youths surged forward, hands grasping thin air as the small boy left the roof's edge. Rue seemed to soar, his legs still running in an impossible leap. As he cleared the dock, he pulled his arms to his side and became straight as an arrow. He plummeted into the narrow gap and disappeared into the churning sea with barely a splash. The gang pulled up to the roof's edge, scattering Kriska as their eyes scoured the murky depths. Lucas slammed his fist down in anger. Rue was gone. Lucas turned to the others. They watched him with worried eyes. "So, who's gonna tell her?" he said, eventually. The end of chapter 5. That was the end of chapter 5. If you enjoyed that, please leave a generous tip in the form of a like, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see when the next chapter comes out. Thank you for listening. Bye.